Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, on assignment, deep behind enemy territory, it's Minnesota still, on assignment in Mankato, it's Arif Hassan, useful human, fantastic writer for all sorts of websites. I'm buttering you up because I haven't been on in a while. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good. How are you?
I am fantastic. I managed to catch both the new Game of Thrones episode and the new Rick and Morty, and I'm just expecting to fall asleep tonight on Sunday night and just have some weird combination of the two, and just have that as a dream, and I'm just going to deal with it in the morning and see where we're at.
That sounds exciting.
Well, things are blowing up, but there's a time portal, and things are just kind of jumping from it'll be fine. It's a 30-minute show. Things tend to be okay at the end of it, kind of.
Did you see that McDonald's sent them a gallon bottle of Szechuan sauce?
Yeah, the Szechuan sauce. They finally ended up getting the giant thing. And what I liked on it was that somebody did the research, or, a college kid who was doing social media for it, because college kids, that's what they're doing,
right?
Is just social media for companies now. Somebody wrote on the label, for use during this brief window of time, or possibly to bring back in 20 years. So I enjoyed that part of that anyway. So Arif is on assignment in Mankato at Mankato State University, working and doing our training camp. This is the beginning of training camp. This is also the new season of Norse Code. Yay! We have plenty. We have intrigue. We have excitement. We have a love triangle.
Character deaths.
We have character deaths. We've got one guy just blowing up ships. It's going to be great. And of course, we have Teddy Bridgewater coming back. Yay! So, we've got all sorts of things to talk about. But before we do, we would like to remind everybody that we are an ad-free show. We appreciate all of the attention you guys give us. We appreciate all the advertising that you guys give us. Again, we could not do this show without you. Without the donations that come in, our show would sound terrible. The microphones we use would be absolutely abysmal. And we would have bumper ads in the beginning and end of our show, and it would just be awful, and you guys would get super annoyed with us. So, thank you guys so much for making it so that we do not have to do any of those problems. And we get to talk about a new donor to our Patreon who gives Tree Fitty. It's a Jan Paul Siegebarth, I believe is how you pronounce that. Tree Fitty, and he says he is paying his monthly fee for decent MOBO coverage. I believe that's the German Assassin, correct?
It's the German Assassin.
As I hear the Ron Howard from Arrested Development voice in my head, he hates that nickname.
Zoom in, freeze frame.
Exactly. He hates that nickname. So, again, thank you guys so much. We are still selling the stickers at norsecodepodcast.com/merch. You can get, it's $5 for a 5x3 bumper sticker. You can show your support. Also, all Patreon subscribers get one for free. So, subscribe at Tree Fitty or better, and you can get one. So, the ways you can help support the show, you can go on iTunes and give us 5 stars. That really helps on the business end of things. It also helps with the charity battle that we're having with Titletown Sound, where between June 29th and September 9th, we're in a battle for the most 5-star ratings on iTunes. The loser is donating to the winner's charity. So, again, if you want to support us, please go on to iTunes and go and give a 5-star review. Make something up, tell us we're wonderful, make some inside joke about the Loch Ness Monster. Just don't be crappy about the other show. Just let's be positive on the iTunes stuff. Also, if you would like to support us, if that is not enough, if you need to do more, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode. You can donate there. It's a monthly subscription. It's you can do anywhere between $1 to untold amounts of money. We would be willing to jump through lots and lots of hoops for untold amounts of money. But if you would like to donate there, you certainly can, or you can go through PayPal, and we have the link on the website, norsecodepodcast.com. Also, we are still selling the training camp guide. And Arif would like to talk to you, the listener, about the training camp guide.
Yeah, so I've tried to format the guide so that it's like kind of always useful for people to have. So a lot of people think of the training camp guide as something that they purchase like before training camps. They can get familiar with the players, and that totally makes sense because maybe the biggest feature of the guide are the 80 some odd scouting. I don't scout the kickers or punters or long snappers, but everyone else has been scouted. And so we've got like a blurb on strengths, weaknesses, and a little bit of background on every one of the players that enters training camp. But I think that it can also be pretty useful over the course of the season because my favorite part of the guide are the scheme breakdowns that we do. And so now with Pat Shurmur here, there's a whole new offense to break down. So there's a little bit on the difference in sort of the passing game, the difference in a little bit on the difference in the running game. And a couple of essays like, how important is the kick return game, that sort of stuff. It really, it's a lot of work that I put into it, 121 pages this year. And it's a great way to support the work that I do here in Mankato, as well as over the course of the season. So you can head over to zonecoverage.com and scroll down on the sidebar. There's going to be a link to the training camp guide, or you can just head over to my Twitter, Arif NFL. It's my pinned tweet, and it'll take you right to the training camp guide. If you don't want to do that, you can go to norsecode.com or norsecodepodcast.com, and there's a link to the purchase page for the training camp guide from there too. So I'd really appreciate it. It does a lot to help me out. It convinced my bosses at Zone Coverage to help cover the hotel here, and so I need to show them returns that this is something that they can consistently rely on. So I'd really appreciate it.
So remember to give Arif some love, and please go ahead and buy it. We are offering it on the same page that we're offering the stickers, so just norsecodepodcast.com/merch, or just the merch link on the website. So, all of that taken care of, we have a lot to talk about. We have training camp, actual news, and extensions. Let's talk about extensions first, because we extended 2 major players on our defense. Let's talk about Everson Griffin. Did we get a good deal for it, and is Everson going to be happy?
Yeah, well, it certainly seems like Everson's going to be happy. It's definitely a good deal. So it was 2 years with 2 years left on his contract, and it's $58 million over the course of 6 years. So it's $9.5 million average, which is just nosebleed good for the Vikings. It's an astoundingly good deal. And even like if you don't think about it in those terms, if you only take a look at the money after those 2 years run up, which doesn't really make sense because those 2 years do have additional money added to them. It's like 12 and a half. It's perfectly in line with some of the mid-tier, high-end edge rushers. So it's not hitting, the Von Miller $20 million. It's not hitting the Justin Houston $15 million a year. It's well below that, and he's a Pro Bowl quality defensive end. They've locked him down for as long as they need him. Like there's a good chance that maybe they won't get to the 6th year or whatever, and that's fine. The Vikings are in control of the contract and can determine sort of how long they want him. I know that there was like a rumor that there's $34 million guaranteed, and that's not quite true. It's $34 million guaranteed for injury. So if he becomes career-ending injury, whatever, the Vikings will have to end up paying out $34 million over the course of, I believe, 3 years. But for the most part, it gives the Vikings a lot of control over a contract for a top defensive end who, despite decreasing his sack totals over the past 3 years, I think he had 8.5 last year, is actually still one of the top pressure producers in the NFL. And so, statistically, he's actually probably due for a regression of the mean upwards, or he's probably going to get double-digit sacks for the next couple of years. So I think it's a fantastic deal. As for Everson's side, I thought he could have gotten more money, but I think what is kind of satisfying to Griffin and his agent is the security of the long-term deal. $34 million guaranteed for injury, a little bit less guaranteed for performance. He's probably going to hit beyond his guaranteed amount. He's going to be there for more than 2 years, which has been completely guaranteed. And that was the whole point of the extension, was to give Everson a little bit more lead time than the 2 years that are left on his contract. So, I would be, if I was, Everson's agent, I would have probably, maybe chomped at the bit a little bit more, but it does give security and guarantees over the last part of the contract that was not guaranteed. So, I think that it's just a phenomenal deal for the Vikings, probably one of the better deals I've seen. I remember when Everson was originally signed, there was a lot of criticism from the national media about signing this guy who had never started because Jared Allen was Iron Man, who had never started to this just extraordinarily long-term, expensive at the time, given that cap environment, expensive deal. I wanted to toot my own horn. I was a huge fan of the deal, and I thought the criticism kind of missed the mark. Luckily for me, luckily for the Vikings, luckily for Griffin, it's turned out into a third contract. So, it's great news that the Vikings did this.
And on top of all of that, on Sunday, Xavier Rhodes also got extended and had a great tweet about it. So the bank account done caught the Holy Ghost.
Money bag emoji, money bag emoji, money bag emoji. It's one of my favorite tweets of all time. I saw it and I just started laughing. I just couldn't do work for 3 minutes.
So Rhodes got an extension, well-deserved extension, one of the top corners in the entire league. And let's talk about it. Did he get $12 million as a signing bonus?
Yeah, it was a $12 million signing bonus, which means that his take-home cash for this year is going to be $20 million because he also has an $8 million base salary this year. $20 million signing bonus is going to be prorated, obviously, in terms of cap space over the next 5 years. That's not bad. I asked him what the first thing he was going to buy was, and he said he already had it planned out. He immediately answered, by the way. He's like, I have it planned out. Diapers. Because he's got a second kid coming.
Well, I mean, I'd say it's a situation of, having priorities, but is it like the sort of thing from the Christopher Walken sketch for Cowbell is he's got the gold-plated diapers just ready for it?
The kid's probably going to grow up with fancier diapers than I think people would expect. So, yeah. Gold threads in there.
So, good on him. Xavier Rhodes, but the deal itself is fantastic for the Vikings as well. That's two extensions that we can be really happy about.
Yeah, and I don't want to be like the team blogger, the team podcaster. It's always what a great deal for the team. But I think that, in both of these cases, it is true that the Vikings probably ended up getting, a better deal than, maybe the player's agent, in exchange, of course, for the player's agent getting, that level of security I was talking about earlier. Xavier Rhodes, was up against, the top corners in the league this year, ended up with the league's best passer rating allowed, according to Pro Football Focus, 47.0. That's just astounding stuff that, you'd go up against people like Odell Beckham, Kelvin Benjamin, not quite Larry Fitzgerald because he was in the slot a lot, but, a little bit Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, some really, really fantastic receivers and have the best passer rating allowed. Despite that, the Vikings only ended up paying him. So they ended up paying him, I think, the third highest of any cornerback, but you have to evaluate every single deal in the context of the cap environment that the deal occurred in. And so if you just take a look at the top 25 cornerback contracts and take a look at it in terms of what the cap space was at the time the deal was signed, Xavier Rhodes ends up having the ninth highest, which I think that's really great news. And I think one of those is kind of fool's gold, right? Because Tremaine Johnson is a 1-year deal with $60 million. It's kind of like the Darrelle Revis 1-year deal for $18 million or whatever, right? That's just that, that kind of skews it a little bit. But even without that, as the eighth highest, you've got a Pro Bowl quality cornerback secured for quite some time. And next year is only going to be I want to say $11 million against the cap, $8 million in base salary. But for the most part, I think that it's really smart for the Vikings not only to get a long-term deal in place before someone hit free agency, but also to reward the defensive players for a defense playing well. The rumors are that the Vikings are pursuing an extension for Linval Joseph, which is great. I think he's a good example of why you try to sign young free agents. He was 25 when he signed with the Vikings, and it's just going to give them that much more latitude to sign him to a longer contract for that second group of contracts. And they're working on an Anthony Barr extension so that they don't have to exclusively rely on the option that they activated for his first round pick. And in a little while, it seems like they're going to have to wait on the Eric Hendricks stuff, but it sounds like they've already initiated conversations. So the Vikings are locking down a defense. If they continue to lock down, both their veterans and their younger players with deals that are friendly but aren't steals by any means, I think that, like, I call the Xavier Rhodes thing a steal, but I think that Xavier Rhodes did come away with something that he could be pretty happy with. I think that that's not only a good thing for the Vikings in terms of their security as developing a core defense, but I think it's also good for the Vikings in terms of being able to bring in free agents. It's a signal to free agents that if you come here, play well, we'll reward you. I think that's it's a good confluence of events.
I was just thinking about the corner situation over the past decade, and I'm trying to remember if Xavier Rhodes is the highest paid corner we've ever had.
Hey, you would have to be, right?
Because even if we were just adjusting it for like the ridiculous amount of money that players are making now, as opposed to 10 years ago or something, like top paying corners for us, that's a really short list.
Yeah, I know Antoine Winfield didn't end up getting any deal, I think, probably deserving of his talents. I think there was always a timing thing. Mm-hmm. It did, I think he got a pretty good, but not like a top-level corner deal when he came from Buffalo. And this is all, I'm just working off of memory, so I could just be wrong here. We have paid a lot for safeties. Like Madu Williams, I think, stands out as a particularly bad contract. But for corners, they didn't pay Chris Cook. Just going back, if Cedric Griffin had never injured his knees, he probably would have gotten quite a bit of money. You'd have to go back to when it's impossible to check, Carl Lee or Bobby Bryant.
One of those before the modern version of the NFL took place, and you couldn't touch a receiver, that sort of thing. You'd have to go way back then. Before looking at it. All right. I was just thinking about it. I was thinking back, it's like, we don't pay money for corners ever. So this is a big exception to the rule, but a really exciting development, if nothing else. So, you're at Mankato. We did get a mailbag question before we start with the big training camp stuff. This is the last training camp in Mankato. Jay-Z Hoodie is asking, what are you going to miss most about Mankato?
I just like the overall atmosphere. I mean, I love the feeling that there's a retreat down here before the season starts to get ready for football, and there's this whole atmosphere. I feel like a big part of the brand that I've personally developed has to do with training camp in Mankato. I think I hit my first 2,000 followers essentially were from training camp. And tweeting out play-by-play, which thank God I don't tweet out individual play-by-play anymore. Those the hotness back in 2013. It always feels
a young man's game anyway.
Yeah, right. I saw some younger tweeters,
make the college kids do that. Not you. Yes. Make the college kids do
that. It really feels like it belongs here. And it's going to be really weird if it's happening at Egan and I'm living at my house, driving over there. The atmosphere is what I'm going to miss the most, because I think that the fan atmosphere is just phenomenal. I think that the way the stands are set up at Blakesley Stadium, the way the stands are set up over the practice fields, I think it's really cool. I like the autograph line, for example, that the players always ignore as they walk past, because they have assigned autograph times and stuff like that.
As is tradition.
As is tradition. I'm gonna miss like walking across that street that connects the players' workout facility to the practice fields, which is where I think it might still be Eric Thompson's Twitter banner where that epic
the
photo.
three people leaving the
just leading the Vikings out onto the field. Yes, I'm gonna miss
with the nuclear blast behind you, and
yeah, right.
Well, that's what you get for wearing a Captain America shirt that day, apparently.
Yeah, well, my fault, I guess. I still haven't busted it out for this year, but I plan to. We got a couple days left. So I'm gonna miss a lot. It's gonna be really weird. I miss it so much that I kind of don't care that it like benefits the team really immensely to have training camp at Egan at their facility. And I disagree with the move. It was obvious. Everyone knew it was coming. It was inevitable. And it helps the team out, and it makes a ton of sense that they would do it. And I definitely disagree with it. I want it to stay in Mankato.
The question on everyone's mind, however, is are you still going to be cooking with the crock pot even while you're able to, go back to your house instead of doing it in the hotel room? Or is it just the fact that it's at the hotel room make it just that better?
I think it does, because it's so funny, right? to have a crock pot going in your hotel room. I was worried because I'm staying at a little bit of a nicer hotel this year, and they might actually enforce the hotel's policies, and I don't know if that includes, maybe don't crock pot and stink up the hallway. I don't know if it does.
Nonsense.
Right. But, so I put out the do not disturb sign as I left the day that the crock pot was cooking. But yeah, it's, I've got my immersion circulator too. So I've got eggs for the morning. I think it's kind of funny to try and, jury rig like a whole, cooking soda. Cause so one of the things I needed beef broth. And so I have, the beef bouillon, better than bouillon, gel that can turn into broth. And I need a way to boil water to make it work. And so I just cleaned out the coffee maker and just
so you were MacGyvering this, basically, is what it was happening.
Yeah, it's so fun to figure out what you can do in a hotel to cook. I could have Airbnb'd or stayed at a residential suites, but Cold Omaha wouldn't have paid for that. So I wouldn't have had all the nice cooking utensils. So I've got this paring knife. I brought a cutting board from home. And yeah, I've got access to boiling water, a crock pot, a microwave, which has a surprising number of settings.
Not something you hear often describing a microwave, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's got the defrost setting was actually really nice to just dry the outside of the meat because you want to get a good sear, right? Which is technically impossible. But you can get some good browning on the outside, which I did.
These are all important things that need to be in the first ever Norse Code cookbook, which I'm going to start campaigning for our Patreon people. I think that between the three of us, Dusty can do a drink section, it'll be fine. It'll just annoy him that he wouldn't be able to do the cooking part, which is frankly why I want to do it.
Right.
But these are all important tips. See, I stay in too many hotel rooms over the course of a year, so I've just become OCD about it. The moment I walk in, I immediately take apart or take down anything that reminds me that I'm in a hotel. The little cards that are out there with HBO is available from this channel, put it in the closet. Or, the coffee maker. I don't drink coffee because I'm not human, unlike you and Dusty. So I take the coffee maker, I unplug it, I put it in the closet. Everything that could possibly remind me, other than the phone, which I have to have in there because it's required, but
right.
Everything else just immediately goes in the closet. And if I just started cooking in there, that would probably be a line too. That's where I would cross the line for me. That really does. Which is funny because I'm moving into a 1-bedroom because I've been living in living by myself. I've been living with roommates for years, and I finally moved into a place by myself. And I was just sitting here going, "This feels like a hotel room. This is just weird. Just not used to this whole weird process." So Arif is still going to cook. Please Please look forward to that next year. But training camp. The first question is, what has been the biggest surprise at training camp this year?
Some of the players it's always a surprise to me when players that I don't think will do well, in part because of my arrogance, but in part because, that's the whole point, right? So, for example, I think that Willie Beavers has played, all right in training camp. I thought that he won his reps today. I think that he did well yesterday. I know that Daniel House and the guy who runs the Vikings fan page both thought that Willie Beavers did poorly yesterday. I kind of disagree. I thought that Caleb Jones wouldn't be all that interesting. He's been sort of the best of the long shot receivers. It's stuff like that. I think Trey Waynes has played better than I expected him to. Laquan Treadwell's played a little bit better than I expected him to. Although I want to say that Michael Floyd has just been so outstanding in camp that they really should give him, more first team reps so that when he comes back from his suspension, he kind of replaces Treadwell, which no knock on Treadwell. I mean, he's playing well, but Michael Floyd's playing kind of spectacularly, and that's kind of weird. I think just generally speaking, the offensive line is holding up for the most part. I mean, the tackles are having a little bit of trouble, but the interior is doing really well against people like Linval Joseph and Tom Johnson and Dayton Jones. So yeah, it's always surprising when people kind of overperform your expectations. I haven't really seen many underperform my expectations. I want to say that I think that I expected more from Xavier Rhodes in camp, from Terrence Newman in camp. And so on. But, for the most part, people have been overperforming my expectations.
What's been the biggest disappointment then?
Probably the biggest disappointment has to be, that, we haven't been able to see much of Riley Reif, and it would be nice to see him. But relatedly, I think that I hoped for more from Mike Remmers as a pass protector. He's kind of getting his lunch eaten. I thought yesterday he did pretty well, but today and the day before yesterday, he was just having some really bad days. So that's maybe the biggest disappointment. Until today, Bradford was continuously just throwing it short, and when he was throwing it deep, he was missing. That was pretty disappointing. Today is a whole different story. They threw deep not only a little more often, but with a lot more accuracy. So that was fine. And yeah, I'm trying to think, like, Dalvin Cook looks special. The linebackers look improved. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, it feels like everyone's good. Which, it's like, if you're new to, like, my analysis of training camp, I think that's kind of surprising because I've usually been very harshly critical of the players in training camp to a fault. I'm very open about the fact that, like, if someone wins, then surely someone must be losing. Who's losing? And so this is the first training camp.
Are you getting soft in your old age? Is that what's happening?
That's probably it. This is the first.
You haven't written any hit pieces about how somebody's a terrible football player lately, so like maybe
that's true.
There may be something to this. If people were just looking at Twitter over the past few days, it would seem like the story coming out of it is the fact that Treadwell is turning some heads.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I don't think that, we're ever going to see a return on value for that first round pick. I don't think he's playing like you expect a first round pick receiver to be playing. But, we've kind of already readjusted our expectations for Treadwell. He got 3 targets last year, 1 catch for 15 yards. And when you hear that and you go into training camp and you see him play, it seems like he could be, a definite contributor. That he's playing as if, he might be able to get, 500 yards in a well-oiled offense with the Vikings. And that's really kind of encouraging to see based off of those expectations. Now, again, it doesn't really justify kind of what was spent on him and stuff like that. But, I mean, he does look like a different receiver, which is really good.
It's weird to feel optimistic about somebody who could double or triple their total yards last year in one play. So it's
right.
It's just odd to hear people praise him so heavily in training camp. I don't even remember if he was getting praised this heavily in training camp last year.
I wasn't a big fan of what he was putting together in training camp last year, so I think that I want to say, and I don't want to call out my colleagues, but like I think that just generally speaking, Vikings bloggers are very willing to just praise the first round, if they're healthy anyway, praise the first round pick in training camp. Like, oh yeah, they look great. But so I think inevitably there was praise for Treadwell's camp showing last year, but I don't think I was that high on him last year.
Has an injury actually been disclosed as to what's going on with Riley Reef?
I think Mike Zimmer said it was like a twinge, and I think
that's
it was
right. It was the twinge thing, yeah.
I assumed it was like in his thigh / hamstring, but I don't really know.
You hear twinge and you think hamstring typically.
Yeah, that's just maybe that's what my brain went to. But Mike Zimmer just said today that he doesn't know when Riley Reef is coming back, which is like, whatever. I think a lot of people saw that quote and were like terrified because they were like it's, because in some senses, like, I have no idea when he's coming back. That sounds really dramatic. But I think it was more
he's out at the farm now. He went to go live with his other family.
Right. And I think it's more like, well, we'll take it day by day. If he's coming back, tomorrow, then we'll know tomorrow. If he's coming back, a week from now, we'll know a week from now. Like, I don't think it's that serious. And I think he would have expressed like more concern other than like, it's not really concerning to me.
When asked the question again, I'm hearing Ron Howard in my voice. When Mike Zimmer was asked the question, "What's going on with Riley Reef? When is he coming back?" All he could do was just shrug his shoulders. What about the offense? How is the offense looking? And Teddy, who looks fantastic in a red jersey.
Teddy's rocking the red jersey. I can't really evaluate sort of rehab from I'm not quite that well trained, but he's moving around. He looks like he's moving fine. It certainly looks like he's not moving with the same kind of agility that we're used to seeing from his movement capability. So I think it's kind of clear that his rehab is just kind of proceeding. But yeah, it's kind of cool to just see him on the field. As for the offense in particular, I hate saying this because it's like it's training camp. We only have had 1 day of pad or 2 days of pads now, and just in general, you have no idea how running backs really look in training camp. But it really does feel like Dalvin Cook is special. And I've been talking to a couple of people. Some people were like inherently optimistic about what the Vikings do. People like Daniel House, who's generally an optimist, and he agrees. But also, you take a look at some of the people who are a little bit more cynical. I think Mark Craig at the Star Tribune said the exact same thing on Twitter, actually. And so there seems to be a consensus forming that Dalvin Cook, especially when you just look at him live, just looks like kind of like a different species of player than most other rookies. So that's really cool. And if the interior offensive line is holding up kind of as much as we think that they will, I don't think Joe Berger is playing as well as he can be or that he has in the past, but I think he's still playing probably pretty well. So if the interior offensive line holds up, I think that you're going to get, a couple of nice chunk yardage runs from Dalvin Cook. And, both Remmers and Reef are better run blockers than they are pass protectors. So the struggles that they've had in pass protection won't necessarily translate. And I've seen pretty good, run blocking sets from Remmers in camp so far. That part looks good. I think just the offense in general in terms of the passing game. The underneath stuff, they've been doing tons of it. And for the most part, it's looked pretty good. Bradford's not like a Hall of Fame quarterback, but he's still been pretty good in camp. There are times when he stares down his receivers and, the cornerback's going to take advantage of it. He takes too long to get the ball out, and that's going to cause a pass deflection or whatever. And those times certainly exist, but, he hasn't really thrown, that many, if any, interceptions. He's generally been sort of a high completion rate quarterback at training camp. And so just generally speaking, it looks like the offense is going to be firing, especially with, contributions from potentially 4 receivers with Michael Floyd off of suspension. And a running game that's going to average more than like 3.8 yards a carry.
Are we allowed that? Are we allowed to move forward with the ball?
Yeah, no, I looked it up. It's in the rules and everything.
Wow. That's different. I was reading something online, and forgive me as I can't remember the person who originated the tweet, that Well, Teddy is going to be put in a weird situation. It's almost like the Tebow situation, where the cult of personality behind him is so loud that it'd be impossible to look at him as as a backup if he's healthy. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so, but I think that the Vikings kind of acknowledge it. I don't know if there are lessons to be learned from what happened with Tebow and how to manage that kind of situation. I don't think someone's going to buy a billboard in Minneapolis and demand that Teddy start. So I think that at some level there's a ceiling that's going to be well below Tebow's ceiling in terms of fan hype and demands to start. But the fact that we've talked about Vikings just extended Griffin, they just extended Rhodes, they're talking about extending 3 other players. They've not had contract talks with Sam Bradford. And so it's pretty clear to me that they are fairly invested in Bridgewater's return and success. And they've got control of Bradford. They can franchise him if they want to, for example. They've got control of Bradford's contract for a little bit, and so they can wait until Teddy comes back. They can wait until we see another year of what Sam Bradford can put together in this offense. But yeah, it really seems like, I don't want to say it's a no-win situation for Sam, because if he's healthy, he's going to get at least $22 million next year, at least, if not a long-term contract for $80 million or more, right? So it's not a losing situation for Bradford by any means, but certainly there's a level of uncertainty for Bradford that doesn't exist for most quarterbacks that you'd argue were in the top half of the league last year.
I'm just reminded of of a song from a terrible, well, I think it's a great movie, but most people think it's a terrible movie, Death to Smoochie, about the perils of being a stepfather, and how this kind of has a few parallels to that. It's hard being mom's second man sort of thing. There is a weird waiting thing going on.
Do people not like that movie?
I've talked to a few people who do not like it, but if anybody doesn't like it, I suggest going to YouTube and listening to the song "My Stepdad's Not Mean, He's Just Adjusting," and just going from there. But it does feel a little odd there. Let's talk about defense. How do you feel the defense is coming together, and how do you feel about some of the standouts?
I've already mentioned that the defensive ends look really good. I think that Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter look just explosive and monstrous. I don't know how much of that you have to be they're up against the backup left tackle Rashad Hill, who I actually like, and a right tackle whose calling card was not pass protection but run blocking. So you kind of want to dial it down a bit, but I mean they've been just phenomenal in terms of their pass rushing capability. They've done a pretty good job. Also in terms of being able to shed those tackles for run blocks, so it's not as if even against run blocking specialists, it's not as if they're doing a poor job. And inside Linval Joseph is Linval Joseph. He's won every one-on-one rep that he's been in. He's kind of lazy about it. He knows he's going to win the one-on-one rep, so he just does it and moves on. It's kind of funny. But the concern for me is at the back end of the defense. The cornerbacks are not, I think, playing as well as they were last year. You compare Xavier Rhodes last year to Xavier Rhodes this year, and I think that in camp so far, Rhodes just hasn't been sort of as on point about a lot of things. Which, I mean, he seems pretty relaxed about it, so it doesn't seem as if it's a huge deal. But he's allowed receivers to get past him, I think, a little bit more often. He's been more subject to double moves. Something he said really openly and loudly during practice once. And he seems to be rusty in it, and I kind of hope that they kind of fix it. Trey Waynes, again, better than I expected, but not as good as Terrence Newman was last year. And so it feels like there's going to be a drop off there. Terrence Newman himself also doesn't seem to be nearly as good as he was last year. It feels like he may have hit an age cliff or something like that, because it really looks like he's just not losing track of, but it seems like he's always kind of a little bit behind when it comes to coverage. Mackenzie Alexander, we're not seeing a bunch of plays in the slot that are targeting the slot. He seems fine, actually, but I think just generally my concern, especially given his performance last year, is just kind of there. I will give Andrew Sandeo some credit, though. He looks a lot better than he did last year. He seems to be a player that's just genuinely improving year by year by year. I thought that he's generally looked pretty good. And then Harrison Smith is Harrison Smith. I'm not worried about him.
Now, the Hitman's going to be fine. Hitman's
Yeah.
going to be just fine.
Yeah, linebackers I didn't mention. So just real quick, Eric Kendricks looks really dialed in. He's generated a lot of like tackles for loss and stuff like that. Anthony Barr is moving well, so I'll give him that. But it's just so difficult to evaluate linebackers in camp that I don't want to like go beyond that. I don't think that he's obviously playing poorly, which is good given what happened last year. But yeah, that's my take.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. We've got quite a bit of mailbag, and this is where we're going to get into some real specific stuff about training camp. So, first question from Mitchell Kane on Twitter. What are the best plays you've seen so far?
I want to say today included the deep bomb to Stephon Diggs from Bradford. I think it was 50 yards in the air, 70 yards total. He was able to get past Trey Waynes. It was Trey Waynes. He was able to get past Trey Waynes and got over to the top of the defense, including Anderson Dejo. Harrison Smith was trailing behind. And Bradford just fits the ball kind of perfectly in stride with Diggs. He didn't have to slow down or speed up to get it. And it was a touchdown. It was just beautiful. It was probably the best pass I've seen in training camp this year. It was a gorgeous throw, and the trajectory was perfect. Everything was just fantastic about it. So that was, I think, a pretty big highlight play. I saw a really Bucky Hodges diving catch on the sideline over, I want to say, Harrison Smith. He just did a really good job. I was pretty close to the action, and it looked like he was maybe going to lose track of the ball, but he certainly secured the ball before he even went to the ground. So that was pretty beautiful. There was a great Michael Floyd one-handed catch today in the end zone, which was even better than Michael Floyd's other touchdown catch today that I thought was just pretty phenomenal. And I think those are probably the biggest highlights offensively. Defensively, I don't think there have been as many big highlights. Again, Bradford hasn't been throwing that many interceptions, and so you don't really have, interceptions, which are probably the most highlight plays you can get in training camp from a defense. But yeah, Anthony Harris has grabbed an interception, looked good. Trey Roberson's grabbed 2 interceptions. He's looked bad mostly, but at least he has the interceptions. So yeah.
Jesse Silva on Twitter asks, what is the best way to use Dalvin Cook, and do you think he'll have an expansive repertoire of routes out of the backfield?
I don't think he's going to have that many routes. I think they're going to be like wheel routes and checkdowns and stuff like that. But that's not to say he's not going to be a big part of the passing game. I think he's going to have a relatively limited route tree, at least early on. He's having a little bit of difficulty getting, the route depths correctly. But he's a good pass catcher, and so even on those few routes, they're probably going to target him, relatively heavily for a running back. And so I think that his role in the offense is going to be, those multi-capable running backs who can do, most of the things that you ask him out of the backfield. The people like, Le'Veon Bell. I think he's going to get fewer snaps than someone like a feature back like Le'Veon Bell, at least early on, given how much the Vikings kind of want to play with McKinnon and Latavius Murray. But I think that he's going to be one of those backs that you can have out there on every down. He's got to improve in pass protection, but it looks like he already has, which is nice. And so he's going to be, multi-capable.
And plus, as a result of being a rookie, it's kind of hard to ask him to be, some Pro Bowl level running back in the way of like protection. So it's you have to imagine that he's not going to be great back there. These things take time, and if he's going to be as talented, he's not going to be like the Adrian Peterson of blocking, of blocking anybody running up, right?
You're right. I think it's unlikely he's going to be as poor as Peterson was in pass protection.
That man had no desire to be anywhere near a running somebody trying to go after the quarterback. Next up, we have Hype Solo 1253 on Twitter, who asks, how has the nickel cornerback position been played so far during camp?
Anton Exum has played it really shockingly well. I just want to put that out there. Like he's I think he was born to be a nickel corner. The Vikings are just waited too long. He's really good at it. Other than that, I think McKenzie's been fine. I don't think he's been, exceedingly good. I saw, probably more from Captain Munro than last year. But that's okay. Newman, I don't think has been playing all that well. And we haven't actually seen Jabari Price in the nickel. The second team nickel is actually usually Anton Exum. But I saw Marcus Sherrills in the nickel, and sometimes he just does stuff, and you have to remember that he's this tryout punt returner and not a genuine depth option at cornerback. But he was pretty good too. This is the thing. So this reminded me of the times that he broke up a pass to Kelvin Benjamin, the time that he was in tight coverage against Greg Olsen, who had to drop the ball in the end zone, and in camp he contested a catch to Nick Truesdell, who's probably the tallest tight end here, and came down with the ball. I was like, what is happening? You're 5'9", that dude's 6'5". But
one of those talent doesn't know height, MFer. Just
right, exactly. It's like channeling Antoine Winfield here, man. The nickel corners have been all right, not amazing. If worst comes to worst, if Mackenzie Alexander is just not fit for it and Terrence Newman is too old, I would really like to see Anton Exum try it.
So we got a couple part question here from Matt in Wisconsin via email that we're gonna pick apart here. First things first, Zim talked a good game about getting feedback from players and other coaches and making some adjustments. It's a sign of good leadership if that's a real thing. However, the team can still seem reactive strategists rather than long-term strategists. Is their focus on the run game on both sides of the ball a necessary adjustment or a strategic overreaction?
Well, I think that Zimmer's kind of always been focused on the run game, which is why it kind of stuck in his craw so much that the Vikings offensively were so poor against the run, and then defensively have been kind of average against the run. Whereas, against the pass, they've been, pretty stellar. And so that's kind of always been a focus. So I don't know if I would call the way that they've talked about the running game this year an overreaction more than a kind of a continuation of that focus. And I think that the running game has gotten too much crap, I think, from fans. And focusing on the running game has been kind of met with derision among especially analytically minded folks like myself. And I think that there's more to it. I think that success in the running game can be meaningful. I think the fact that yards per carry doesn't correlate well with success doesn't mean that running well doesn't correlate with success, because I think that's a poor efficiency metric. I think that you take a look at success rate for runs and you start seeing a lot of relationships form between its impact on the passing game and its impact in helping win games in general. And I think that the fact that the Vikings weren't very successful, that most of the runs didn't do what they were set out to do, they didn't accomplish what they were doing, played a relatively significant role in how the Vikings played. Like, for example, the best quarterbacks in the NFL only convert third and long 1/3 of the time. The Vikings are particularly bad at it. They converted 1/8 of them, among the worst in the league, if not the worst in the league at converting third and long. But you can avoid that with a pretty good running game. The Vikings didn't have that. So I think that that's not necessarily an overreaction. I think it kind of makes sense as a general focus, I think, for a team that's focused on sort of chunk yardage gains and more consistent styles of play, as opposed to the Carolina, Seattle explosive styles of play. But also, I think that it's been kind of a big part of ways to control the schedule of both the offense and the defense. So I think that itself is not reactive. I do think that, generally speaking, that criticism might be fair, that the Vikings are doing more to react to what's happening in front of them instead of creating strategically sound outcomes.
The next question is more on the Wilfs and like coaching strategy. So Wilf's choice to bring in a defensive-minded coach, Zimmer in this case, is an offensive league. In what ways is that a good or a bad strategy?
I don't think it's a particularly meaningful split. I think that you take a look at offensive coaches and defensive coaches, and I don't think that over the course of like a 5-year period, you're going to see more success from one or the other. I think it's an offensively minded league. But I think that in some cases that might mean that because it's easier to generate offense, that the ability to generate defense is unique and rare and might be valued more. So it could be the case that the distinguishing features between top defenses and like defenses that rank like 7th or 8th or 9th is much bigger than top offenses and offenses that rank 7th or 8th or 9th, in which case you do want, a defensively minded head coach. Like you can spin it actually kind of both ways. But I think just historically speaking, I don't think there's any preference for one or the other. You take a look at the past Super Bowls and you've got a lot of defensively minded head coaches. I mean, Bill Belichick comes from a defensive background. A lot of people think of the Patriots as like this offensive organization, and it's true that their offense is really good. Bill Belichick plays like a really big role in that. But, he's a defensive-minded head coach. He was a defensive coordinator for the New York Giants. He still plays a bigger role on the defense for the Patriots than a lot of people think. Of course, you've got the Seahawks, who, have always been sort of defensively-minded. Pete Carroll's a defensively-minded head coach. Take a look at the Denver Broncos. They're obviously a defensively driven team. Take a look at the Carolina Panthers. They do have a lot of offensive success, but Ron Rivera, I believe, comes from a defensive background, and they were built off of Sean McDermott's defense. So I don't think it's necessarily bad to get a defensive-minded head coach, given sort of the success rate we've seen from defensively-minded head coaches in the Super Bowl and in the playoffs.
On a related note, rate Shermer as an offensive mind in this league. Is he a scheme follower, like stealing from the best, or a leader, like trying to innovate?
I guess he's probably a scheme follower. I don't think that's inherently bad. I think that you can get coordinators who innovate a lot that are not necessarily great coordinators. I think Bill Musgrave is a really good example of that. I thought that as an offensive coordinator, as a play designer, he was extraordinarily innovative. I thought he did really smart stuff with Percy Harvin and Adrian Peterson, and dealt well with the limitations of having Christian Ponder as your quarterback, but he wasn't a good offensive coordinator. But you could take a look at Darrell Bevell, for example. I don't think that he's particularly innovative. I think that he is very bold in what he takes, right? Like I think that his incorporation of running concepts in Seattle was very smart, but I don't think he innovated new things. Like he may have been the first to bring like the play option pass to the NFL, but that was something that had already been kind of established in college, and there's even like evidence of, not evidence, it's not a conspiracy, but we know that he went down to like various parts of the country like Alabama to take a look at these kind of things, and he stole them, and that's fine, right? So I don't think that there's inherently one that's better than the other, and I think that it's more about when you acquire new information, no matter how you acquire it, whether or not you create it or you get it from somewhere else, it's more about your ability to deploy it effectively. I think Pat Shurmur has a lot of weaknesses as an offensive coordinator. I think that just generally speaking, Shurmur offenses have just not been explosive. And I've compared Shurmur to, this is actually in the training camp guide, I've compared Shurmur to quarterbacks who've played with and without Shurmur. And invariably, I think every single quarterback that's played both with and without Shurmur has thrown for a higher average depth of target in offenses without Shurmur than with Shurmur. Shurmur has consistently had issues converting 3rd and long, which when you combine with Bradford's issues converting 3rd and long that extend beyond his career with Shurmur, I think is going to create maybe problems for the offense this year. But just generally speaking, I think Shurmur's a pretty fine offensive coordinator. When you get out of the he doesn't have explosive enough plays, I think that he has done a pretty good job kind of adapting to the personnel that he's had And he dealt with just this abysmal receiver core in St. Louis, and I think he was probably the best out of the Sam Bradford coordinators in St. Louis. So he's a pretty good offensive coordinator that has some explosiveness, like things that he needs to work on. But the fact that he steals is not why that's the case, and the fact that he's a quote unquote scheme follower, I think speaks kind of better to him because he's done a better job incorporating what he's learned.
Final question. If Heineke has a strong preseason and Bridgewater projects to return midseason, might Keenum have any trade value at all as a starter if someone else gets hurt in the league?
I think it's possible. I think it's kind of unlikely. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if in that specific situation that the Vikings just cut Keenum as opposed to try and trade him to some team that needs a starting quarterback. But I'm not saying it's impossible. Like, I feel like the thing is, I feel like Matt Castle is probably worth more in terms of trade value than Case Keenum will be. What was he worth? Like a 5th round pick, I think. 6th round swap.
Yeah,
I don't know,
something like that. Yeah.
It was worth a 5th, 6th, something like that, and I think Keenum's worth less. So maybe you could get a conditional 6th, maybe you can get a 7th, maybe a team that's particularly desperate. They're in the hunt for the playoffs, and they just cannot rely on their backup for whatever reason. Like maybe it's the Arizona Cardinals, who are probably not a good fit for Keenum. But as an example, the team whose backup situation I've never been a fan of. I could see a 5th round pick or a 6th round pick, but I just think it's much more likely that they would just cut ties with him in a situation where they're very high in Taylor Heineke, who, by the way, took a good number of second team snaps at quarterback. Not all of them. I think Case Keenum may have even taken more of them, but when it came down to the 2-minute drill, Taylor Heineke was working with a second team offense. So, they're definitely considering it.
Yeah, the idea of trying to trade him just seems like more trouble than it's worth. So releasing him really does seem like the better option between the two.
Yeah, right. There's so many things to focus on during the season. I mean, how much time are you going to spend trying to
Do you really want to start spinning that other plate too?
Exactly.
Is that where we're at? Next question. LMLass572 on Twitter asks, the method of suicide we should use if Green Bay wins the Super Bowl this year in Minnesota.
I've always been partial to drinking bleach, but that's pretty painful.
Helium. That's how you should do it. It's like CO2, or it's like locking yourself in your car, but you're using helium instead. It's still painless, and it still does everything it's supposed to do. People just don't have access to helium. They have access to their car. But I'm telling you, if Green Bay wins,
got a helium crisis, man. I don't know if you should advocate the wanton waste of helium.
There's not going to be much left of you. It's for a period of time, so I feel like the selfishness meter, meter has already you've already reached the red on that. As far as this goes, it's par for it'll be fine. One less container of helium.
All right. Well, I mean, a lot of Vikings fans. Just gonna put that out there.
Well, we'll cross that bridge when the time comes. We'll brand some Norse Code helium. It'll be fine. Miles Swami on Twitter asks, has there been any noticeable upgrades to the offense versus last year?
Yeah, I think the running game is pretty clearly upgraded, if only because the offensive line play is consistent in camp. The explosive plays that we saw today. Sorry, hiccup. The explosive plays that we saw today were, I thought, in upgrades. So yeah, and I think there have been noticeable upgrades to the offense versus last year.
Also, if Norse Code was the title for the next Bond film, what is the villain's name?
It's got to be Mr. Rogers, right?
I feel like that's the logical choice. Or it's going to be Mr. Rogers as the main bad guy, and then there needs to be a henchman, a real journeyman, somebody who's been around for a number of years that has had problems with the protagonist. So I really feel like this could be Chad Greenway's like main like. This is the role he was meant to. He was
That's
born
true.
to play.
Yeah, you'd be like Odd Job, right? You'd be or Jaws. Yeah.
One of the two, yeah, exactly. It'd be like Dave Bautista's thing in the new, the last two, or the last one, last Bond movie. He just can't die. Next question is from Zach Sloan on Twitter, who asks, which coaching/staffing change do you think will have the biggest impact this year?
I mean, I've been a big fan of Daryl Hazel and his coaching style. It seems to be, he's the receivers coach. It seems to be pretty instructive, and the players seem to be responding to it well. Kennedy Polamalu is actually really fun to watch as a coach. I'm going to go with Kevin Stefanski, the quarterbacks coach, who was previously a quarterbacks coach, but was last year the tight ends coach for the Vikings, with Pat Shurmur kind of moving from like tight ends coach to offensive coordinator and whatnot. I think that, it's to quarterbacks coach to, yeah. I think that could be kind of interesting. You don't have Adam Turner, or not Adam Turner, because Adam Zimmer and Scott Turner. That's it, Scott Turner. You don't have Scott Turner coaching the quarterbacks anymore, and I think that might lead to better movement in the pocket and stuff like that. What's interesting is that Stefanski was also Christian Ponder's quarterbacks coach, and maybe that sounds like a ding on his resume. But I thought he did some pretty good work with, someone who's frankly just not that great against pressure. So I think that Bradford, for example, I think has been moving better in the pocket against the pressure that seems to be pretty consistently showing up in training camp. And I think that you can attribute a lot of that to Kevin Stefanski. So that's probably going to be the most impactful.
George Koenig on Twitter asks, what would Heineke have to do to win the second QB spot?
Probably keep playing like this. He I think has had some pretty good days. I think that, today he threw an interception that I think a lot of people will blame on him. I would blame it on Moritz Beringer probably running the wrong route. And just in general, he seems to be doing a pretty good job. If he elevates his level of play just a little bit, he'll have overcome, I think, Case Keenum in a big way. This was, incidentally, Case Keenum's best day in camp, and so the separation that Heineke had been kind of developing potentially has kind of snapped back a little bit. But I think that just generally speaking, Heineke's playing better than Keenum, and I think if he continues to do that, I think he'll earn the second quarterback spot.
Next question is from Billy Dine on Twitter, who asks, what thoughts do you have on Hill's potential based on his camp showing?
I assume this is about Rashad Hill and not like Sean Hill.
Let's go with Rashad for the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked what he put together for the preseason for the Jaguars last year when I was kind of forced to look at it after the Vikings signed him. I thought that was actually really good. I thought he had a really good game in Week 17 this last year. In training camp, he hasn't, I think, met that level of performance. And I think that's more of a coming down to earth moment than it is a fluke. I don't think his true performance level is the level that he had in that Week 17 game or in that preseason game. He had a lot to fix coming out of college, which I also watched his college stuff because of the guide. And I think that we're kind of seeing kind of more of who he truly is, and I think that he is already significantly better than a lot of backups that you'll have along the offensive line. That's not an enormous compliment. Offensive line depth is just historically, it's just awful around the league. So, I don't want to like oversell, hey, he's one of the best backup offensive linemen you'll ever find. He is, and I do think that he is showing starting quality play, maybe better than Jeremiah Searles, when he was forced to start a tackle. I think that I genuinely believe that despite the fact that the Vikings just signed Remmers to a 5-year deal, I think that they should have a competition between Hill and Remmers as soon as Riley Reif is healthy. Like that's how much I've really liked Rashad Hill's play. All
right, next question is I like this one quite a bit here. Next question is from Alex Goebel on Twitter, who asks, what do the safeties behind Sendejo need to do to start over with him on week 1?
Well, I do want to tell Alex specifically, stop screwing up my jokes on Twitter, man. Kind of want to answer your question, but
like that. Just consider that a warning. Arif's not mad; he's just disappointed.
What are the safeties behind Sunday? I don't think they can. I think Sunday is improving even more. If we see like pretty significant improvement from Jaron Curse, his length is very, very evident in camp. He uses it really well, at least in camp. He did a really good job creating pass deflections these past 2 days. Sendejo called him the Crane, which was pretty awesome.
Like, was it like Karate Kid style or?
I'm not sure. It felt like it was construction crane style.
Oh, fine. He's not gonna. Nobody's telling him to sweep the leg. Gotcha.
Right, like it was. He had this fantastic pass deflection on a pass intended to Rodney Adams that I think in most cases against most defensive backs probably would have been a completion. But he just he just stretched up and palmed the ball and batted it away. And Rodney Adams just he didn't have a chance. And so Anderson Taylor was like, well, you're not going to get one over the crane. Which I thought was funny.
Next up, Cheezel on Twitter asks, barring injury, what do you see as the carry split for Cook, Murray, and McKinnon?
Yeah, assuming Murray's healthy, I would imagine. I think that the split is going to be 2-1-1, maybe. I don't think it's going to be 1-1-1. I think that we're going to see, maybe half the touches go for Cook, and then the other 25% split up between McKinnon and Murray. That's ideal. I think early on we're going to have a 1-1-1 split, and I'm not going to like it. I think that Cook is showing well enough right now that he deserves to be a primary starter. I think that over the course of the season, we may end up with like a 2 parts Cook, 1 part McKinnon, 1 part Murray. If you reduced Murray's role even more, I'd probably be okay. Even healthy, he'd be a great third and short and goal line back.
Makes sense. Parker Fisher on Twitter asks, is having a serviceable O-line a pipe dream?
I think we're at the point where you could say it's probably serviceable. I think Remmers needs to improve, but I think that it's probably serviceable. And to me, serviceable is not one of the bottom 4 offensive lines in the league. Like, my bar for what serviceable is pretty low. I think it's going to be a little bit better than that. I think it's probably going to be below average offensive line, which is going to be a pretty significant improvement.
Just a little below average.
Just a little below average. And I think that's probably going to be where we're at. So, I think it's going to be serviceable, and I think it's not a pipe dream. And even if it doesn't happen, you were not wrong to dream it.
If you will it, it is no dream, as Walter said in The Big Lebowski. Final question is from Jay-Z Hoodie, who asks, is Arif actually tanning out there?
My skin is getting darker, so I guess that counts as tanning. I don't know if people have noticed, but I've noticed because I know what I look like. I'm darker.
I know me, and this is a darker me.
This is the darkest timeline for me.
Is that where we're going with this? Okay.
Yeah, right.
And we're right back to Rick and Morty. Sweet. All right, that is going to be it for this episode. Depending on how it looks this week, we will be recording again with as much information as we can possibly give you. We are looking forward to starting up the season here, getting the preseason games knocked out, and getting back into our 2 shows a week for the regular season. So we are definitely looking forward to that. If you like what you've heard, please go on to iTunes, give us 5 stars, tell us that you love us, tell us that Dusty says too many times, tell them you don't like the sound of my voice, but you still like Arif. Works for me. just go ahead, go to iTunes, put 5 stars in. We are trying to win a charity battle with Titletown Sound, so please put 5 stars on. We do appreciate it. If that's not enough, if you want to do more, if you hear value in this show, please go to patreon.com/NorseCode or paypal.me/NorseCode and donate a couple of bucks. Give us Tree Fitty, help us keep the lights on, help us keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Just help us continue to be the best Vikings podcast we possibly can be, and to be ad-free for you, the listener, the public. So please do that. Also, we have merchandise for sale. We have the bumper stickers for $5 and Arif's training camp guide, which is also available at norsecodepodcast.com/merch. Arif, what would you like to plug for before we leave today?
I've got an article on zone running over at zonecoverage.com. That should be in the show notes. But yeah, you head over to zonecoverage.com. And there's a bunch of my training camp stuff there. So we've got interviews from Sam and Luke, who have interviewed a couple of players. We've got stories on like offensive identity and zone running, as well as my notebooks that kind of update everyone on, how everybody's looking in camp.
Fantastic. Well, that is going to be it for this week's show. Again, if you'd like to donate, please do. Please give us 5 stars on iTunes and just tell us that you like us. We need an encouraging word every once in a while, something to help get us through the heat of August and the heat of training camp. So, for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you later this week, and we will still be just a little below average. Thanks for listening.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.